All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the episode of Old Reader, New Reader. I have a very special guest today. The wonderful, beautiful Jessie Gender has agreed to hang out with me.
I agreed. No, you grabbed me and forced me to do this. I had no, I'm kidding.
Don't tell them that. They'll believe you.
No. You were very awesome and asked me to do this. And I was very excited because I was very excited to talk about comics because I don't often give myself the chance to. So thank you.
I'm so glad. So I did put your information in the description. So all your socials and YouTube. I fell in love with your YouTube randomly. I don't know. I found you. I'm so glad that I did. And I
don't know why you would be. Dear God, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, I love it. And I was like, I guess I'm going to message her. Maybe she'll say yes. You're like, yes. Like, oh, cool.
No, of course.
So I don't know if you want to give a further proper introduction of yourself before we get started into the book, but...
Yeah, I don't know if there's a proper introduction to anything to do with me, but I'm Jessie Gender. I do a YouTube channel where I talk mostly about Star Trek, but not exclusively, and I kind of also talk about social and political issues in geek topics. So we'll talk about LGBTQ issues, kind of along those lines, like basically trying to use geek culture and pop culture to talk about larger issues with society, both within the text themselves and surrounding it. So any issues facing actors and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of a general overview of what I do. And then I'm also just a weird, dorky geek a lot of the time too. So that also happens.
Absolutely. And I super recommend everyone to check out Jessie's channel because not only is it just quality content, but also I love the way you discuss things.
Well, thanks.
Like I don't even know how to describe why it's so good to me. Not to make it awkward. I'm just gonna be like, let me give you compliments. But
I mean, I'll take them to keep them. If this is going to be an hour of just you complimenting me, I'll take it.
I'll change the show. But no, I love the way you talk about things. And I feel like it's so fair and honest. But like as a fellow LGBT person,
LGBT.
Yeah, LGBT alphabet mafia. I've been called.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, people when they're upset is when they say that. But I really appreciate it, and I've just been like sending your channel to everybody.
Well, so thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Oh
I never know what to say because I'm like, other than thank you, it's just like I just sitting here in existential dread and anxiety and hope people enjoy watching it. So there we go.
That's all of us. That's all of us geeks. That's all of these people.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about Sandman today.
Yes.
In particular, A Game of You, and this is recommended by Jessie. So for people who have watched the channel before, I did read Sandman with my co-host, the other person on this channel, Omar, my former co-host, and his wife, and they're huge Sandman fans. And I didn't care for it. And I tried. And I was upset. But then when you recommended it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try it. I'll feel so bad if I don't like it. But I do like it.
See, so I would have... Well, I am glad you like it, but it actually would have been interesting if you hadn't liked it either, because I think I like having conversations with people who don't like stuff, so that's totally valid. So,
well, I'm glad. I do want to real quick, because my husband can't help himself. Says, does the book have Mr. Sandman song by the Chordettes? No, it does not.
I know. I think if I recall, actually, that one of the issues does at some point. I might be wrong on that.
Lee says it's an oral history of Metallica's seminal hit Enter Sandman.
That's actually what it is. Neil Gaiman clearly is a big metalhead. That's what I think of.
Well, I appreciate the They Might Be Giants reference later on. It's very of the time.
Very of the time. If you want to say anything about this 6 issues, it's very of the time in both good and bad ways.
So you sold this to me as something that, like, basically, even if I hadn't read other Sandman, that I would still get on board with. I didn't really need the rest of the context, which I think is true.
Yeah.
Which, so luckily, it fits the theme of the show.
Yeah.
Old reader, new reader. It is new reader friendly, I would say.
Yeah, I that's part of why I wanted to pick it, because I think it's an interesting This one, in my opinion, it's one that's my personal favorites of the Sandman comics. But I also don't, for like fairly obvious reasons. There's like a early transgender rep, which I'll talk about in it. But I also think it like kind of highlights a lot of the good things about the comic, and also a lot of the kind of like bad things, as we were talking about, like of the time of it. And I think it's just so interesting to talk about like where the comic succeeds in a lot of ways and where it fails in a lot of ways. And as you said, it's like super accessible to just sort of pick it up and go with it, and just sort of like, if you're not a big Sandman fan, you can read this one and be like, all right, this is a self-contained story, but then, you know, it might encourage you to read more of it. Or if you just end up with this one, you have a good 6-issue story. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely like, I'm glad you mentioned like how it's of the time, which I think is important to know going in. Which is why there's a lot of books I'm not going to cancel. They're of the time. We have come far in representation.
Exactly.
It's like reading Lock and Key by Joe Hill for the first time. One, the art was very jarring, and two, there's some language in there that I wouldn't use anymore. But it's the 90s, early 2000s. I grew up then. I wouldn't talk to me now.
If I met me then, I would have been like, oh, you poor idiot.
Absolutely.
To be fair though, I'd say that to myself now, so
yeah, same.
Yeah,
absolutely. So normally I give a quick like summary, so there will be spoilers if we have any new people join the channel, but basically we're dealing with this woman Barbie, who is dealing with having to go into her dream world to save something. Basically, she's had some connections, very fantasy-like, and she's got to go back into her dreams to save some world. And along the way, her friends and also people who live in the same apartment complex that she does, her good friends, kind of get put in there with her. They try to save her and help her along the way. Now, that is like the most like dumbed down way I could possibly talk about this book. So if that's interest you, you should check it out. But I think even if we talk about this, it's gonna be hard to spoil it.
I was actually impressed you're able to like bring it down to that level, because this is like, it's one of those, like, it seems fairly simple, but there's so many complexities to it that it's just like, I applause to you. I don't even know if I could have been that succinct.
Well, I panicked as I started because I was like, wait, there's a lot happening in here, because it's a lot. But it's still very digestible, which is what I was surprised with.
Yeah.
Because earlier Sandman, I was like, this is a lot.
Yeah, I think
this is very palatable.
I think like if you get into early Sandman, what's kind of like hard with early Sandman is he kind of gets a bit stuck up in, like, if you read like when Neil Gaiman started, this is his first time writing comics and having this big platform, so he's kind of like, oh, I can do this cool like niche DC comic stuff that no one's ever heard about, but I'm a huge nerd about, which I appreciate. Is like, like
the crap, what's it called? The Bizarro. Thing. Basically Bizarro. Weirdzo. Yeah,
Weirdzo thing that they reference in there. So like, but even more niche and other stuff, but he like doesn't explain it as like, in here it works within the context of this comic itself. So you can kind of like, even if you had no idea who like Bizarro was or what that was referencing, you kind of understand it. Whereas his earlier writing in the series is very much, you can tell like earlier writer not really being accessible. Is kind of like, I'm an artist and I will make these big references to all these different things and you'll just have to be along for the ride. That sort of like thing.
Absolutely. It's very much like a novelist writing comic book for the first time and not sure where to like leave the prose and keep it in.
Yeah, it's a bit pretentious, like if that's probably the best way to put it. And this is coming from a big Neil Gaiman stan, if you say that I think like, I think that does come across in early Sandman. Yeah,
and I think if I had read it when I was younger, I'd feel differently, as with most things. But like being a newer person, it's a little bit different because I don't have any nostalgia attached.
Exactly.
But that's why I like this, because I immediately, it's like, here's different characters. Sandman is like in the peripheral. He'll be around, but you don't need to know.
Yeah, really. Exactly. It's sort of like he's just sort of like the vehicle for this other story that's going on that he sort of like steps into but doesn't really come into, which actually fits his character really well, as this sort of like ethereal being beyond time. Like the other comics focusing on him can kind of feel a little bit untethered, because they're just sort of like, how do I relate to this cosmic being?
Yeah, I like that he just kind of showed up. And she's like, I am this beautiful man, and I will be like a little vague on things and help you at the end, but no big deal.
Like kind of help you, like maybe, but not real. But yes, but no.
It's very chill.
Exactly.
So I guess what we can start with is talking about before we go back into like dream world, basically. And man, this reminds me, I don't know if you've ever played Dreamfall or The Longest Journey. They're great point and click adventure games, and that's all I can think about because they're like the same thing as this. But anyways, so we start off with Barbie, and we don't know much about her except for she's very much like, you know, kind of a bimbo-ish like woman living in a big city, and I mean bimbo in a very friendly way.
Like she's clearly like not fully like handling the world around her at the moment, I think is the best way to put it. I will say she does appear, she is a side character in an earlier story, so there is a little bit greater context for other readers, but not much, to be fair.
Okay.
So
we're introduced to her, and we're introduced to Wanda, who is also fantastic. And eventually we get to the end of this, and I cried at the end, and I realized I didn't have time because I had to get ready for the show, but it's really sad.
We will talk all about Wanda because she's one of my favorite things. And also one of my she's complicated in both within the text and outside of the text. Anyways.
Absolutely, which I know we'll get to, but there's on the one hand, I'm very glad to see it. And on the other hand, there's things I would have done differently, wouldn't do now.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, in a minute. But like, this is very much like, let me put it this way. For the 90s, when this was written, her character is like way ahead of her time. For today, she's not the worst, but she's still a little, you can be like, I probably wouldn't have written it this way if it had been done today.
Absolutely. So we're introduced to them, and then we're introduced to the neighbors. So very quickly, you get the vibe that like, you know, Wanda and Barbie are just these very fashionable but poor girls in town. And they're very friendly with their neighbors. It feels like any sort of like New York movie set in the 80s or 90s where everyone's really close. And they're all going to each other's apartments for things, like to get sugar or milk or cream or whatever. And we've got a lesbian couple, which is really cool. And
also yeah,
I was surprised. It's like, okay. I mean, I think they dealt with stuff pretty well.
Yeah.
And that's where we start. And they kind of have a conversation at like on their way to or from Tiffany's, which I love. We're talking about they don't where Barbie doesn't dream. She hasn't dreamt for 2 years. And so immediately I'm like, okay.
Something's up.
I see. Because we don't really get a lot of picture of like what's going on in the dream world, except for dialogue at the beginning, which I liked. Although as an ADHD person trying to follow who is who in the dialogue, it's very difficult.
Oh yeah, no, it's not at all helpful.
At least I got to see them later. But at first I was like, no, I must figure out which color is which name.
Yeah. I also just a quick touch upon something with before that you mentioned earlier, the like family feel of the household. I love that so much, especially in this context, because it very much read to me like there's a lot of these characters are LGBTQ, especially during this time, like the found family in New York, when you're sort of being ostracized from other places. Yes. That like found family deal and like forming of the house like read super real to me, and I loved that sort of found family aspect of it, even though not every character is LGBTQ. Most of them were, and I found that to be super cool.
Yeah, it made me think of like, speaking of found family in New York, it made me think of like shows like Pose.
I was actually about to say that too. It does remind me a hell of a lot of Pose, like just people forming these like group homes to be like, well, we'll take care of each other because no one else will. So.
Which is very New York. I feel like, you know, I feel like you're all in small apartments. This is my media interpretation of New York. Yeah. I'm in Kentucky. I don't know.
I never lived in New York City. I lived in Buffalo, New York, but whenever I went to visit New York City with friends and have people who live there, that is kind of like the vibe. You do get to like know the people around you because you're kind of so cloistered together. You know, living in LA, I lived in LA for a time. You don't even get that there because everything's so like spread out. So yeah,
that makes sense. In Kentucky, we're all very friendly, but everything's spread out, so it's not like a real friendly.
Yeah, it's not like, it's like friendly, but not like, oh, we're like this person where I'm going to go and ask you for like your froggy mug.
No, Oh, I love that froggy mug. That's such a weird little thing, but I thought it was really cute.
It's why I love Gaiman, because he has these like weirdly, like oddly specific details throughout all of his work. Like there's just like, that's weird and kind of tonally jarring with the rest of the work, but like kind of fits in a cute way.
Yeah, and already like everyone is so distinct in this, because Barbara, or Barbara, whatever. She's very just like kind of in her head about things. She's very artsy, and you've got Wanda, who is so extra and just very like lively and fun and talks to people, and you get the feeling that maybe other people in the apartment like Barbie more than Wanda. Like when Wanda goes to talk to the lesbian couple to get cream, it's like, why do you want it? Well, it's for Barbie. Oh, okay. Foxglove.
We'll get it for her. Yeah,
the really hot girl that's upstairs. Yeah, we'll get her some cream. It's fine.
And I like that it's shown in different aspects too. Like, I mean, we've kind of danced around this a little bit, but like Wanda is trans, and is like, so like, like very much like in your face. Like I'm not going to apologize for being trans in any way, shape or form, and just kind of let you know that. And you can tell that there are some people that like the lesbian couple that really don't have a problem with her being trans. They're just sort of like, you're abrasive when we're not the biggest fan. We don't hate you, but you're not the biggest fan. And then you get people like George, the sort of like grumpy neighbor who maybe has something else going on guy, who clearly has like a sort of transphobic thing going on.
Absolutely. So then quickly we realize that George, the grumpy neighbor, is now I'm getting into, I don't know why I'm summarizing. We should just talk about it. I'm trying to like lead into parts we can talk about, but it's becoming me summarizing it.
It's your show. You tell me what you want to do.
Okay, so yeah, because I want to talk about characters a lot, but we should talk about the story too.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's very dense. I could talk about this comic for like 5 days. So yeah, we can pick and choose stuff.
Okay, so I guess we should talk about the story itself. So like, so basically we find out that Barbie's backstory, she's got this like, this dream world that she used to dream and go into. So someplace that like when she slept, it was more sequential. It wasn't like a one-off dream, which I feel like is like a theme I've seen in fantasy stories before, especially children's ones, where you wake up and you live in your dream world, which would be, to me, the best possible scenario.
Yeah.
But turns out something happened to her 2 years ago. I was a little fuzzy on the details, I guess, with her ex-husband.
That was all stuff that happened in a previous issue.
That makes sense.
Yeah, she was, just to give you context, she was just sort of, there was another story that focused on a completely other character that she was sort of in the periphery of. And she was like, it was actually a similar setup now that I think about, like she was one of the neighbors in that girl's house that she was living in. And kind of had stuff going on with her husband. So she was part of that story. And then sort of like she takes center stage here, but she was never center stage in that story. So it was kind of like a protagonist thing.
That makes sense. So she finds out that like the world's in trouble, and so she has to go back there. Basically, she gets contacted in her dreams because of her sweet dog.
What was it, Martin Tenbones? It's just adorable. It was absolutely adorable.
I'll never forgive.
Oh my god!
I'm so excited about that damn dog.
And gets brutally murdered. Like he comes into the real world to come and get her because something's going on with her land, and like gets shot like in the streets. It's like, Jesus.
It'd be like if Miss Marvel is going to catch with like Lockjaw, but then in time that couldn't in time, he's dead.
Yeah, exactly.
I already planned this whole story with that dog in my head, and he was gone. So sad.
Don't get too attached to anybody. Is really just the role.
Oh my gosh. And yeah, so I guess like I guess we just talk about like the dream world. I really liked it as far as it felt like it was this sort of opposite Wizard of Oz. In a really cool way. 'Cause she's got these, or like a Winnie the Pooh. She's got these like cute little animals around her that are trying to protect her, get her to the cuckoo, and save the world, the land.
Yeah. And just so people know, Cuckoo is the villain of the piece that they keep, like, who's taken over the land and destroying it and sort of thing. So,
and tries to attack Wanda in the real, or not Wanda. Well, yes, Wanda, but also Barbie in the real world. And man, makes me so sad. Just like because everyone's just trying so hard to help her, and she's trying to make it through. We don't know what Cuckoo is really, and every one of them just gets dead.
Murdered, just brutally murdered the entire time.
The monkey.
The monkey gets okay, so they go into like a forest and they get it. They are like, it's very creepily done. I loved this was one of my favorite parts because how they goes in, they're like trying to get to the main area to go after the cuckoo and attack the cuckoo. And they go into the forest and they're sort of going through and they know it's dangerous, but they're like, okay, just kind of stick to our own path and we'll be fine. And then the monkey guy disappears and isn't there anymore. And then a few days later, they find him strung up in a tree, murdered. And it's the most eerie thing because they go up to him like, are you okay? And then these weird voices start speaking. And it's just these monsters that live in the forest that have nothing to do with the cuckoo. It's just so creepy and terrifying.
Yeah, there's a ton of just creepiness in here, which I like. It pairs so well with this like fantasy dreamland she's in. Because even though she's in this, and could be, if you take in all the creepy stuff, this is a great just fantasy story.
Exactly, yeah.
But it is grotesque.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because at the same time she's doing this and she's on her dream journey, her friends are trying to protect her, and one of her neighbors, who apparently is an old witch, very cool, super murders the dude, George, the angry neighbor, who's secretly working for Cuckoo.
Yeah.
And it just cuts his face off.
And is made of crows, which was awful. Like that's what sends her into the dream. Like he opens up his skin and is made of crows who go and attack all the neighbors and sends them into dark dreams, which sends Barbie into her dream world. But then like the witch lady sort of is like, oh no, screw this. And she goes and murders the guy, which is just, oh my gosh.
Which was great because like, as you know, we get this great vision of like all the crows giving these bad dreams to her friends, which are devastating. They're hard to watch. Because you've got, oh wow, I don't remember both lesbians' names. I know one of them is Foxglove,
which is so Dex. Is that no? That's not right. The other one, I forget her name, but yes,
the shorter one.
Yeah, like she was pregnant because she cheated on her girlfriend, and so she has a dream about like her baby gets born and like eats her girlfriend's baby, and it's like this grotesque monster thing, and it's yeah.
Which also what a fun lesbian character because she didn't even know she could get pregnant as long as she's standing up.
It was like weirdly adorable. It was like you cheated on your girlfriend, but it's kind of adorable that you're like, how do I know if I'm pregnant? Like what is going on? I'm like, oh, you are a weirdly sweet summer child despite your bad choices.
Which I appreciate the way Barbie was talking to her because it's almost like, I mean, this is me reading it in 2020 vision, but like 2021 vision. I was like, are you trying to fish to make sure like it was okay and consensual? Because that's the vibe I was getting. He probably wasn't like that. Probably just like, did you like it? Are you okay? I think my vibe was like, she just checking on you.
I think that it kind of read that way too to me. Like, what I liked about it is that Barbie.
Hazel, thank you, Colin.
Oh, yes, Hazel. That's right. What I liked about that conversation where like Hazel goes and talks to Barbie and sort of like asks these questions. Like, I like that Barbie isn't super judgmental. Like she's kind of matter of fact and says, well, you need to talk to Foxglove. Like this is the thing, but she's not like, oh, how did you do this? How horrible. She's just like kind of offers up what to do and her opinion on how to proceed without really being judgmental about it, which I thought was like really cool to see. And also really cool to see across sexuality lines, which was also really cool. And also written by a dude in the 90s. Like all of those things.
That's
I'm like,
pretty good.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but like again of the time, like Gaiman, like dang, you did really, really well for the time you were writing this and the person that you are, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we get Foxglove, formerly Donna. Who has this like nightmare about like a past ex who's really toxic and abusive, and this really sad conversation where you know this ex's ghost or whatever is like, well, does she make you feel the way I do? Blah blah blah. And she's like, well, no, but she doesn't hurt me.
It's like
she broke my heart.
It's like that's adorable, and I love how that kind of comes around later on when they're in the dream world going to say Barbie. They have a similar conversation where like Hazel gets revealed that Hazel's pregnant and cheated on her, and Foxglove's pissed off. But then there's this moment where they're pissed off, and Foxglove says like, well, we'll need to fix up the nursery together or whatever. So just like still pissed off, but alluding to the fact that they'll still be together after this. It was just like just so nicely worded and well presented, and sort of like paid off both of their arcs, like her worrying that Foxglove is going to leave her because of this, and Foxglove sort of being like, all right, I want to stick with this person who earnestly loves me and cares about me and didn't want to hurt me in these moments. And so I thought that was just like a nice resolution to the two of them.
Absolutely, and done so quickly
and
so well. Like because I was just that moment of like, man, raising a baby together is gonna be really expensive.
Yep, that was
like,
the one.
Just very sweet, and that just showed. I mean, like, it's a little thing, and not to overpraise just a little line, but little lines like that do very well for me when I'm reading a book like this.
No, I think those lines are so great because they like do so many things at once that like it wraps up both of those characters' arcs while also kind of like providing something speaking to the moment of the situation too. It's like it's one of those, like, I'm assuming when Gaiman writes a line like that, or any writer gets a line, it's like, yes, I did it. I did the writing thing.
You're gonna love this one.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'd be the same way.
I pat myself on the back for that one. Yeah, that sort of moment.
And then Wanda's nightmare, which I can't even handle because it just broke me. Like, I can't even think about that, like wanting to cry about it.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to that like point of like this being of its time, but also like well done, but it's not perfect in an interesting way. So Wanda's story is like I'm trying to remember the specifics of it just to kind of drill into it, but it's basically
Bizarro World or Weird Zoo.
Yeah, she kind of goes to Bizarro World, and like the Bizarro version of herself is like her as a like pre-transition or as a guy, like sort of like the better version of herself. When it was interesting because she kind of like framed herself earlier on in the story. She references like, I used to think of like the Bizarro world of myself where I got to be a girl. And so this like interesting subversion and like worry like that like that concept like speaks to me so much as like just kind of a similar like anxiety and worry of like I had those dreams as a kid of like, oh, I just wish I could be seen as a girl. I wish I could be that way. But then like having anxiety when you do transition of like, am I really this, like that sort of like what society tells you that you are, like you're just a man, and sort of that idea. And then it goes into like her being kind of forced to have vaginoplasty, a gender confirmation surgery, in like a really horrific and traumatizing way, which is something that like clearly, as the text shows, like she wants to have gender confirmation surgery, but she's also terrified of it because of like it's a major surgery and very scary, and she kind of has this like trauma around like wanting it but not wanting it, which is such a complicated nuance of a trans experience for even like trans people sometimes to like wrestle with. So to like see Gaiman sort of wrestling with that in this is like to probably use an improper term for this, but like it's ballsy for him to have done that, and I think he does it fairly well. The only like negative, again, it's like it's the negative that I would kind of give it, and again it's just because like we've moved forward since then, is like just centering everything about Wanda around her transness and around her like the trauma of like this like horrible event and this horrible like surgery and things, which kind of plays into ideas of like surgery being mutilations and things like that. So like that element probably has like you'd probably want to frame this sort of scene and moment in a different way today, but for the time I think that this was like a super detailed and super thoughtful and super like narrowed in focus on the anxiety that a trans person would feel in sort of wrestling with these emotions. So it's so complicated in a really interesting way.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I ranted for a bit there.
No, I love it. It's great. I'm totally cool with it. Just the imagery, just like her being on the like the table, and I just
yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
So they're all going to nightmares, and then we eventually get to the girl whose name I can't remember, who's a witch, and she was so cool. Where like the crow's about to get her, and she's like, no, and then she just and then no more crow.
Wait a minute.
And then she goes to kill George, and then she brings everybody else like, hey, I want to check in on you. How's everybody doing? Let's go get Barbie. She's in trouble. Let's go to George's room. It's just very like,
yeah,
let's go, guys.
And he's like, oh yeah, he's dead in the other room. I killed him. And they're like, what?
No, you didn't. No, he's in the bathtub. I killed him. and now I'm gonna rip his face off and staple it to the wall and his eyeballs, which was really gross.
Yeah. And I love Wanda even vomits at it. It was just great.
Thessaly. I appreciate it. It's so gross, but so good. And the way he would just talk and just so.
Yeah, I'm just imagining like that's the kind of like voice.
And that line later where it was like somebody told him to hold his tongue. I think it was Wanda or somebody, or maybe he made the joke himself. He's like, I'd hold my tongue, but I literally can't. I don't have any hands.
Oh my gosh. And he's fascinating too in how he taunts Wanda later on, to kind of continue on that thread. I mean, well, we should talk more about Thessaly because there's that element of it first before we get to that part, I guess. So
yeah, so I'm not even sure the best way to describe Thessaly and everything that kind of happened with her.
Yeah.
And that's me missing some Sandman stuff, because she's obviously been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And she calls upon these like outside forces.
The moon
forces. Of the moon. Because the moon goes away and comes back. And she's so cool about it. She just tells them what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. And they enter her. What's interesting about this? So this one's may I give a little bit of an interesting sort of history lesson?
Please.
So what's interesting about this is how that sort of scene goes down is she calls upon the moon and they enter the dream world. Mm-hmm. And she makes a point of like, oh, this is a very woman-centric thing. Like, we need menstrual blood in order to like enact this ritual, and Wanda cannot come because she's a man. And she says that several times, very misgendering of Wanda, which is kind of speaks to like, weirdly, it also speaks today. And it's kind of interesting that she's coded as a witch in modern context. If we're going to talk about other witchy-based people who misgender trans people, but anyways, we'll leave that off to the side. But it's at the time what we would today call TERFs, to use a term that I know might be contentious for some people. Mm-hmm. But at the time, those people were still around. There was a sort of like divide in feminism and feminist spaces between being trans inclusive or exclusive. Again, what we would call TERFs today. But this sort of divide was constantly going on, and this sort of push and pull between, oh, trans women aren't really women, they don't deserve to be in feminist spaces, and trans women saying like, yes, we do deserve to be in feminist spaces. And so I really loved that this character who was so cool and badass, and like part of the like that's I liked her, but I also liked that she had this very problematic view towards Wanda, and we were meant to empathize with Wanda being excluded from this ability to go into this world and take part in it, and how she eventually even suffers from it because of that. So I just thought that was again a really wonderful understanding of a conversation that like even to this day was going on at the time, but even to today was like a super like hyper like super, what's the best word, touchy topic, and super nuanced in even within feminist spaces of like trying to understand where people get excluded and who's doing what. Like there are people who like to kind of do what I was alluding to earlier without getting too much into it, because I don't want to get too contentious here. With J.K. Rowling today, like that's clearly a very hot button issue, and one that is hard for a lot of people to understand who are like kind of the outside looking in, like where the problems are. Like I know it gets confusing within this conversation of why she's just deemed by transphobic by some and not by others. And so I loved that even in the 90s, Neil Gaiman was taking that on and wrestling with it, with these characters, and framing it as the very like clearly like understanding that it's not as good as like this person evil, this person good, but also clearly giving us a side to sympathize with. Like we were clearly supposed to sympathize with Wanda, but it wasn't doing it at the expense of like saying Thessaly is a out and out like villain, but definitely in the wrong and darker because of it, which I thought was like a really cool way to take it, because that's even how I kind of view the situation today. So anyways, again, my rants.
No, I love it. It's all good. But yeah, I mean, and we have George later who also brings that up as well, right? Where he's like, where Wanda's like, well, why did they leave me here? And George's like, I'm gonna start some shit.
Oh yeah. And
so he's like, because they think you're a man, and you know, the moon, they're not cool with you. They don't see you as you. They just see you as like the gender that you know you were born with. Like that's it. And she's like, no, I'm a woman.
Yeah, she even has I even shared this on Twitter because it's like my favorite line. Let me see if I can find it real quick while we're talking. She's saying something to him. because I was reading this, and she even says, oh, he says, it's like gender isn't something you can pick and choose as far as the gods are concerned. And she says, well, that's something the gods can take and stuff up their sacred recta. I know what I am. And I'm like, yes.
So good.
Freaking love it. Freaking love it.
And it's just really nice to see, because in comparison to other like media that has trans characters at this time and previously, like I hadn't seen something at that time that did such a good job advocating for that character, and didn't include like, yes, people notice things, but it wasn't this outright disgust that we see in other media at the time, other movies that have the very typical unfortunate either like making fun of people or the throwing up once you figure out sort of deal, which is very common. It was something that just felt nice.
Yeah.
So, like, even though you can recognize like the problems of it and just like the problematic way people talk to Wanda and how they deal with Wanda, I was very appreciative of like her own advocacy for herself and Barbie's advocacy for her. That's what
I adored about this so much, because a lot of the stuff at the time, even when it was like trans positive, it was very much like other people would swoop in and be like, we're going to defend the trans woman. And like, aren't we great defenders of this person? We're like, pat us on the back. But I love that in this story, like while people like Barbie advocate for her, Barbie is still like learning herself. And she's still like, she like dead names Wanda at one point and like says, that's your real name? Alvin is your real name? She's like, no. My real name's Wanda. Alvin is just the name that like I was born with, but Wanda is my real name. And I love that, like, even when that the advocates are getting stuff wrong for her, they aren't shown to be like the ones that always get to stand up for her. And Wanda gets to, like in that sacred recta comment, like she is so much like, I am going to advocate for myself, which is something you so rarely see with these types of characters, that especially at this time. But even still to this day, of like, she stands up for herself and like never lets anyone misgender her in any way. And I love that.
Absolutely. So let's dig in back to Barbie and her journey through this. So eventually she meets Cuckoo, who is like, okay, so I got a little confused.
Yeah, sure me too, don't worry.
Was like a younger version of herself, because she also mentioned the whole like imaginary friend. And so I had a hard time figuring out what that was. So
the way that I think it wasn't clearly expressed. It was kind of like this is where we get into a little bit of Gaiman's pretentiousness and not making things 100% clear with they find at one point like a definition of cuckoos. And I think the implication that you're supposed to get is like in cuckoo birds will lay their eggs in other people's nests, in other birds' nests, and then those birds will sort of kill everything that's in the nest. And so what we're supposed to get an implication of is that the cuckoo is a separate being that took on the form of Wanda, because she was sort of like, or not Wanda, excuse me, of Barbie, because Barbie was visiting there, and sort of like it sort of took on her essence and became a part of her. But it was like a sort of a separate entity that got trapped here because of Barbie and this sort of like this other compact that Sandman had sort of made years ago that we get into a little bit later. So she gets trapped there, and because she's a form of Barbie, that she starts killing everything like a cuckoo does, like killing everything in the dream world, but also is like part of Barbie and sort of still has like an understanding of the world because of Barbie and was able to kill everything. So Barbie has some like complicity in this world as well, and what happened to it. It's not entirely clear, and there's some wibbly wobbly dream logic, which I think was partially intentional, but it is a bit confusing.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Because
we get to the end of this road, and again, very opposite Wizard of Oz in a own way. And she realizes that like the cuckoo's place is just like her house; it's her old room, and the characters that were traveling along with her are these toys that she's had, which is very cute.
I want that Martin Tembones, the dog doll. I want that so bad.
Someone's gotta make that. Someone's got to. Absolutely.
I'm sure it's got to exist on like Etsy or something.
Yeah. And she's been lured here by this other version of her / imaginary friend, who very easily just like, nah, you're asleep now, and I've got control of you because I've got control of everybody. But no, really sad because like what the bird one is the one that turned her in and like was her friend and betrayed her. She's a boomer.
Damn. Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh.
Just broke my heart. Felt like it felt like watching any of my favorite like animated movies growing up, and then having one of the birds betray you. I think
it's like no, you were supposed to be the chosen one.
That's supposed to be that penguin from Swan Princess or the puffin, and not Iago.
Yeah,
everybody.
I was with you though. I was with you.
Okay.
I was also very upset when they capture. They like straight up like cut the neck of the like detective mouse character.
I know.
I was like, geez, that was so dark. Ugh.
So sad. But then eventually your friends come and like, I love what they kind of bring the mouse guy back for a little bit.
Yeah.
Life. And he's just like, let me be dead.
Yeah, just leave me alone.
I'm tired. I failed her, you know?
Yeah.
I'm good.
It's interesting. This is something outside of the context of this run, but it isn't. She gets a brief mention towards the end. Actually, you get to see her at the end. But death is a character in this world in Sandman. And so it's sort of interesting this implication of like the dead people are still around and like kind of pissed off, like because George says that too when he gets brought back. He's like, let me die, like what are you doing? I'm like so annoyed. Yeah,
he's like, I was on my way.
Yeah, I was doing stuff.
But I'm so glad because later, you know, towards the end of this, while this is all going on, there's also like this tornado happening or hurricane. I don't know which one it is.
I think it's like
I feel really dumb about that.
No, again,
it's
Neil Gaiman being mildly pretentious and being like, I'm gonna be complicated because I'm an artist.
Yeah, and this part was I didn't like as much because I felt like it was complicated for no reason. I think it detracted from what I like what happened. I mean, I appreciate what happened afterwards, and I can see why he had to have this happen. But then I'm still confused because basically they, you know, Wanda's protecting her, but this storm is brewing. And she hears this woman that's down there who's this homeless woman that they ran into earlier. Well, I say homeless, I don't know. Mentally ill woman that they ran into. That they assume to be mentally ill. Maybe she just notices the moon being gone and back and big dogs. I don't know. And Wanda brings her in because Wanda's great. And then she notices the weird voodoo with the mask and stuff. And it's very confusing to me. But then basically a storm comes again, opposite Wizard of Oz, destroys everything, and then Wanda and that woman die protecting Barbie. I don't know how the other women come back, if they do or not. I don't know.
There's supposedly the rule, like, because Wanda makes the wish at the end that they get back safe and sound, that they eventually do, but that they take their time, I think was the implication, that Sandman was like, I'll get them back, but you didn't specify how long.
Yeah, y'all can chill for a bit.
Yeah, and since he was mad at Thessaly and everything for invading the dream world, I think he probably just like took his damn time.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So yeah, and then this is where we'll talk about the last issue, I guess, later on. But this is one of the things that I'm like, I get why Gaiman did it, but he kills Wanda and she sacrifices herself, which is cool. But this kind of falls a little bit into the tropey things that happens a lot of this time, which is like, yep, bury your gays, yep. Yeah. And doing it in like it wasn't just the bury your gaze trope to like punish her in any way, but it falls into this other trope of bury your gaze, which is kill the gay character in order to spur on sympathy, which comes in the last issue, which we can talk about later on. But like kill her to make you feel bad about trans characters so that you'll want to in real life not let trans characters experience this, which like fair and understandable, but that happens so often in fiction of this time. Like I think of, because I'm a Star Trek nerd, like the episodes like The Outcast, which had transgender characters and did the same thing.
Also a Star Trek nerd, I get you.
Yep.
Mildly pretentious. I mean, he's cool, but I doubt mild.
Yeah, fair, Emily. Very fair, very fair. So yeah, so this is one of those things where like I get why he did it, and I understand the like desire to do like, let's kill her so that we can sort of like have our statement at the end and have this really honestly very sweet final issue. It's one of those like, it's not necessarily a problem within the text, it's a problem within like the broader context of other works going on at the time, that this is just a trope. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, yeah.
It's always hard when I talk about stuff like that, because it's like, this is fine here, and you can make the justification for me here. Like, Gaiman could sit down and tell me like, this is why I did it. I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense for your story. I totally understand why you'd want to do that. But then when you sort of like pull out the scope and be like, but you look at like all the other fiction and how all other trans representation was going on at the time, to have like another trans character who was so well done, in my opinion, to be murdered, or to not be murdered, but killed, is just like, oh, again, every time a trans person gets to see ourselves, especially around this time, we always have to die. And that just starts to just pile on. Like, we don't ever get a chance to have a happy ending. And so it starts to make us feel like in real life, trans people don't get to have a happy ending. So in the story itself, it's justified. It works. And I think it makes a lot of sense in the context of like the time. I think that it was a bit of a problem, and I think it's highlighted a little bit more in this work because Gaiman does such a good job everywhere else with this character, that I think to fall into that trope here is like, you are clearly a better writer than to fall into like, you could have, like, you are a better writer. I'm sure you're a creative enough writer you could have done something different, because you always zig when you sort of zag, and I'm sad that you kind of did the sort of tropey thing here.
So we have a good question, but Jaden would like to know, what is the bury your gays trope? He's writing a story and would like to avoid that. Basically, it means a lot of things.
Yeah.
Because it fits in all sort of LGBT. Oh, Raphael said next subject. It fits in a lot of different stories. So I think a lot of times it can be either, one or more of a gay couple passing away. So like, speaking of somebody who follows a lot of like lesbian stories in media, very often, even recently, like as far as like the 100 and other like movies and shows, you'll get a couple, but one of the girls will always die.
Yeah.
They're not going to survive each other. They're always going to die. And same with trans characters in media. They die of natural causes, or they get murdered, or there's AIDS, onward. And it's usually used to like almost like fridging, which is another term of like killing someone to push the main character's story. And a lot of times it's somebody that's marginalized too. Yeah. So it's like, oh, but this person's so great, and we're going to use this death of this person to further theirs.
Yeah, to further their story. Yeah, and so basically, like the simple answer to that is just like gay characters being killed, gay LGBTQ, I'll just say LGBTQ characters getting killed at the end of stories and not being able to survive the stories. And the reasoning for it kind of comes in a variety of packages. Like I said, this story that's like, oh, the character is killed to teach a lesson, to like, we don't want this to happen in real life, so make sure you take care of your transes. Or it will be like the fridging trope, as you said, or it will be like also, as you said, like half of a couple getting killed. And the problem with the bury your gays trope in modern context, it comes out of a history of like the Hays Code in cinema, which was said that if you have a gay character or a gay coded character, like coded as gay but weren't explicitly said to be gay in the film, because that they had to be punished for their sexual perversion. That went away, but the trope stuck around because gay, just like writers are like, yeah, gay characters, we kill them. That's just something that we do. And so, as I kind of alluded to with this story, but it happens in so many others, like generally the bury your gays trope is not necessarily bad it can be very, very bad and very, very harmful and very, very terribly done, like is the case with the 100 was a terrible example of this. But generally it could be justified within the text. The problem is just like every gay character has this sort of trauma, either a death or a trauma related death with a partner involved in their story and somehow. And so it's like, it's not necessarily always bad, but it is always bad given that how often it happens.
Absolutely. And I think that's like, and it's always, that always comes into my mind when the like broader part of like representation comes in. Because I had somebody in a couple videos ago from a certain subset of people that was like, okay, there's a lie. There's never been representation. I'm like, no, there's definitely been representation. Whether it's been good or not is different. Like representation of gay people, of LGBT people hasn't always been good. It's been there. It's been queer-coded villains in the stuff you grew up with. It's been people that die in front of you because they're sinful or weird. or it's been a joke, the representation was there. It's not necessarily good. And so there's a reason I get very excited when there's good representation. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's woke. Doesn't mean it's politics. It's just, it's nice.
Yeah. And even too, whenever we have conversations about like good and bad representation, people often like think like, oh, well, it has to be good or bad. But as we see with like Wanda here, like there are shades of gray where like there are parts of her story that I'm like, this is great. This is really wonderful. Like even today, like her saying the gods can stick it up their recta. I am a woman. That's amazing today and still powerful today. And so like, that's amazing. But then there's other elements of her character that are awful or bad or tropey that fit into these other things. So it's like with a lot of things, we can say like, this is generally a net negative. This is generally a net positive. But I think with almost every representation, it's generally somewhere in between of like, we should talk about the nuance of like, this part of her characterization is good. This part of her characterization is bad. And the reason we kind of fall into these ideas of like, it has to be good or bad is because there was so little of it and we had to like find it in different spots. And so because we had to find it in different spots, these like nuggets that we came to like have to like Wanda had to represent all trans women, which is like never going to be the case. You can't do that. And so as today, what's great about today is we're starting to see even more representation. And so it becomes less about like, is this a good or bad representation? And a little bit more about, what elements of this representation is truthful, what can we learn from this representation, because it's not like all on one character to be the sole trans character and everything. There's still a lot more that needs to be done. We still need more queer characters and things, but we're heading in that direction, which I think is super cool.
Absolutely. And now, we can enjoy a lot of books that just have just regular shitty people.
Exactly.
If you want a shitty trans person, you can have it. If you want a shitty lesbian, you can have it.
Because trans people are can be just as shitty as all the rest of us, or all the rest of us.
And not like a weird evil shitty, just like a regular person shitty.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all we want.
I'm a trash person, so I want that representation.
Yes. So I guess before we get to the funeral issues, chapter 6, I guess we'll talk about the wrap up, which I also thought was done pretty well. As somebody who doesn't have a lot of Sandman knowledge, despite having read it, like the first 2 volumes and then just forgot. Again, ADHD, poor working memory. Not everything sticks.
Yeah, no. I read this like 2 or 3 years ago, and even I'm like, I don't remember anything. So,
I really like the way it wrapped up still, because like it was still weird. Like I do feel like a little bit. There's I wanted more from Barbie's story, like the reason she connected, a reason why her house was there. It was still a good story regardless. It didn't have to be the focus, but I was a little bummed out that it wasn't some like deeper meaning. But I liked whatever was going on with like Sandman and that like little girl and the original woman he made the contract with. That's just a good, fun 90s fantasy whatever happening that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
Because the little girl tricks Barbie into doing this thing with like this necklace thing she has, and this weird obelisk that has Japanese on it that I couldn't understand which word they meant to put on there.
I have no idea. So I was like, sure. That me being like the most ignorant, like white person who can barely speak English. I'm like, that Japanese, that's probably not problematic, right?
I couldn't tell. It was the alphabet for a foreign word, and I couldn't tell which foreign word they were trying to do. But I was like, it's fine. But she tricks her into doing this thing. It's going to destroy the world and let her fly, let her leave. But really just Sandman comes in. It's like, hey, this is my place. And you didn't call me, so I'm going to talk to you. I'll talk to Barbie. Ooh, fucked with you, fucked with your friends. Let's fix this. Let's talk. Just very chill, which I enjoyed. This sort of just like, I'm beautiful and I'm here. I would like to go nap. So
yeah. What I love about this is like the imagery that this is where his kind of pretentiousness is stuff that I really like, when he has this like really beautiful imagery for the Sandman character, because we learn that it's referenced earlier in the story, but we learn like this fantasy world that they've lived in is like the dreaming is this sort of world that he rules over, and all of dreams sort of enter and exit through that. And this little fantasy world that's here is sort of like a pocket like dream world that people can come and visit during their dreams, but it's sort of like one that's like way off in the distance of dreaming. And like they're called eddies, and they die and they birth up and they just disappear over time. And I just think it's such a wonderful imagery of like dream logic, but it makes kind of like a weird like logical sense within the world of it. Like, oh, like as people's dreams change throughout, like of course, like several of people have very similar dreams. Like we dream of like wanting to go to a fantasy world, so of course like maybe all of us enter the same dream world. But as like people's like as time moves on, maybe that sort of dream world like dies because people don't dream that way anymore, and a new one crops up. And so this one was sort of dying, and Dream comes in at this moment because as this world dies, like, yeah, it's time for this world to die. And there's like this beautiful imagery of him like packing it all up, and like all the elements sort of like come into his clothes. Yeah. And this like he like they're in the world, and yet he's like scoops it, this like contradiction of him like scooping up the world and putting it in his cloak, yet they're in it. It's just this like weird imagery that's like contradictory and like fits the dream logic of the world that I just love. Sorry, this is the pretentiousness that I'm here for with Gaiman. So
yeah, I enjoyed this part because even I didn't need to have all the answers for this. It's fine. It looked like a world that was probably built for more fantasy minded people, and especially children. Probably something that was more sequential. They could just keep visiting over and over again. I love dreams like that, so I thought that was great. And I love that Barbie at the end was like, can I just keep it? Can you just bring it back? She didn't want all of her friends to go.
Yeah, which is so sweet.
I thought that was really cute. And I love the sarcastic of him back and forth with the team, because for a while it's just this little piece of land. And like, but what's gonna happen when Barbie leaves? Because she's just dreaming. They can a different way. And he's like, I mean, I won't take it from you. I'll leave it here for you guys. I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
land to stand on. It's just very. I like this a lot because I feel like I did not get a good feel of Sandman when I was reading it at first. I was like, okay, cool, this guy's fine. I understand people like it. I'm just not connecting. And the problem I feel like is I just needed this goofy, weird sarcasm. That's what I needed. Now I like him. I needed the smallest morsel to connect with.
Yeah,
like I get it now.
Well, because yeah, again, I think I referenced this earlier. Like this was where he kind of works best in these stories as sort of like the figure that comes in, because he is there are some stories that humanize him in later issues, like when there's some stuff about his son and stuff, so like that starts to personify him a little bit more. But especially in early Sandman, he's this like ethereal figure that is very difficult to like identify with, intentionally so. And so it's like either you're here for the weird, pretentious like ethereal being fiction, or you're like, I don't like, how do I identify into this story? And there's nothing wrong with not getting it, because it's just like it's really, really distancing. And so he works here when he is not the main sole character focus. Like Barbie is the character we're meant to sort of like see as the protagonist, and him just sort of coming in as this ethereal figure sort of works with him being sort of on the periphery as opposed to the central character.
So I know that we're getting close to time. I'm cool to keep chilling and hanging out and talking about it until we're done.
Sure. I got no life, so what do I?
Hey, that's what I like to hear. Because usually I love to finish talking and then chill with the chat, because I'm sure they'll have some questions for you too. Although right now they're talking about Swamp Thing, which I am following
I also love. I see people seeing Swamp Thing and Animal Man and the Rot Saga. I could rant about that too. Anyways, that's
so good.
One of my personal favorites.
I'm upset about how good it was. I was like, I'll just try Animal Man, and then I did, and I was like, this is amazing.
Jeff Lemire's run on Animal Man is like one of my favorite runs in comics. Period.
It's so good.
The final issue of that, I know we're getting off topic, but the final issue of it is Jeff Lemire's Animal Man. Like I was like, it's fine.
Same. It's just the perfect levels of like grotesque and family, and it's like they made it for me. They're like, here you go.
Yeah, it's like here's this is for you. It's like, for me,
Jeff. Thanks.
Like him like killing the brother and leaving him dead. I'm sorry, that's a spoiler. I apologize. I just realized this might have spoiled for everybody.
Okay, you guys will forget it, right? Forget it.
Sorry to everybody who didn't know that. Forget it. Go read it. It's still wonderful. But that like consequences of that issue and like keeping those consequences just like, oh, beautiful. So,
man, I haven't talked about Animal Man on Over Your New Reader. I need to.
Yeah, it's so good.
So, Chapter 6. Barbie wakes up. She does a very cool veil makeup, which she does weird makeup on her face. And so I love watching her do the veil.
Yeah. It's like so extra in the best way.
So her. It's so dramatic. And she goes to the Wanda's funeral.
Sorry, my cats.
Oh, I love it. Mine will eventually show up, I'm sure.
They've appeared a few times.
They like to show up in the back.
Mm-hmm.
My cat and my dog and my other pug, they're just always here. Reader, new reader, rot world, please. I would love to. That'd be great. So she goes to Wanda's funeral, and she goes with like Wanda's aunt, who is supposed to be the chill one of the family, which is not a great sign because she's not. And so we get a very familiar scene. I feel like, where you have a friend who goes to a funeral of a trans friend, and they have to deal with all of their family dead, naming them, using the wrong pronouns. And it was so sad because I really wanted Barbie to say, I'm glad at the scene at the end where she writes Wanda's name on there in tacky lipstick. But I was so hoping she would start a thing. I just really wanted her to start something.
Yeah. No, again, this gets into like that interesting sort of fallout from Barry Gaze, because this scene is so hard and tragic and painful, and you get that Gaiman's kind of point is like trying to like point you towards like, this is awful and we should not be treating people this way. But what I also really like about it is the truthfulness of it. Like, as you were saying, like, it feels that you get that awkwardness that she feels, because I feel like, while a lot of us would want that moment of her being like, screw you, she was Wanda, you know, this is who she really was. In a lot of cases with trans people, like, that didn't always happen. Like, they would die, especially from like AIDS at the time, because the AIDS epidemic was going on, and they would be buried, and who they really were was forgotten by the family that abandoned them, and sort of whitewashing who they were to sort of protect the image of the family, and how horrible and tragic that was. And there's a lot of injustice in that for trans people. So it reads, and there was even friends who showed up were like, well, we don't want to rock the boat, this is a funeral sort of thing. And so that reads tragically very true. It's hard to read, but it's one of those, like, it's very real, it's very truthful, it falls into the tropes, but it's also like realistic in a lot of ways too. So it's this weird, again, not fully bad or fully good, it's just sort of like intriguing of what it's showing. So,
and I definitely cried. I mean, I cried everything, so like it's not that hard, but I totally cried. It got me. I didn't cry this time because I knew it was coming, but the first time I did, I was like, it's fine. It's okay. No. I see Jessica saying to people to watch It's a Sin on HBO Max. We're already sad. Don't tell people to watch It's a Sin right now.
I need to watch it. I need to watch it.
Jessie, it's so wonderful, found family. Just it is not a number. Let me tell you.
I have heard nothing but wonderful and tragic things.
Yeah, it's beautiful and just so devastating. Especially if you like sweet cinnamon roll boys that don't.
I mean, who doesn't?
Oh, so great. Kelsey, I love the characterization of Wanda's aunt. Not a great person, but somebody doing their level of best despite their obvious to us biases. Same dark gray spaces, Thessaly. The realism makes it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like that sort of gradation there with the characters. Like, none of her Wanda's family like get her or got her, but the aunt was like trying on some level to understand, but still being like very transphobic and not understanding. And you get this sort of sadness of like, she's never going to fully understand who Wanda was. Even though she tried, she never will. And how sad that is. And then you get the sort of like at the funeral, you get the rest of the family who's like, he's going to be misgendering him or her, him saying like, he's going to be remembered as the God-fearing child he should have been. It's just like very horrible and like tragic to her memory.
Oh yeah. And as somebody who lives in the South, that is accurate.
Yep. Yep.
So usually at this point, before we get to just chilling with the chat, It is tradition of a new reader to give the book a rating, even though ratings, don't really mean anything, honestly, because my rating is always going to be just based on my personal things and not really like, yes, this book really, did this, and this. And so it should be given this rating academically. It means to be like, I bet I really like it, how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we do now.
Yeah.
And I don't mind starting off, but I would give it a 7.5 because I really, really like it. And I enjoy it way more than I thought I did. I think it's something that will stick with me. So that's major props. There are definitely rooms for improvement that I am aware of from just the time period that it came out. And a few things that were a little confusing that I think I would have changed a little bit.
Yeah.
To make it, I don't know, to fill in some gaps for me.
Yeah, to make it a little bit clearer. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think I would probably give it almost the same. I might give it an 8 just because of like my personal connection to a lot of the stuff and my feelings, and also just my love of like the dark fantasy elements of it. But I think I totally agree with everything you said. Like I think it's a really good, like if you're not into Sandman or didn't get Sandman and didn't want to start at the beginning or just wanted like a good example of what it can be, this is a good starting place because it gives you sort of like a full encompassing of what it's going to be. This sort of like creepy, dark fantasy thing that mixes the real world and like fantasy and dream logic and all this stuff. It's very progressive, especially for the time, and yet it also gets things wrong because of the time that it's in. So I think this is just like a perfect encapsulation of what this series is. And I think for that, I think it's just an interesting sort of like place to sort of like hone in on for the whole series. So yeah, I would probably just agree like 7.5, or I would probably lean towards an 8 out of 10, but definitely pretty much second all your opinions on it. So
and I would definitely recommend it. Like I'm really glad that I've read it regardless. And it does make me more apt to read other Sandman things, which that's a big accomplishment because after the first one, I was like, no, I just have to accept it.
Are you a big audio drama person?
I downloaded it, but I haven't listened to it yet.
It's I actually really love the audio drama version of it, and they're gonna do the entire Sandman series they announced, which I'm like so pumped for. So
I think maybe that's better worth trying for me because I do like audio dramas. I love podcasts. Like I think I'll like it. So maybe that's a better step than immediately going back into it.
Yeah. And they do it issue by, what I like about that is like it's issue by issue. Like they actually just redo the issues. And I also like Neil Gaiman, speaking of like of its time, one kind of note on this, like Neil Gaiman's spoken about in interviews that he gets that a lot of these things were of their time and would not be how he would have done them today. And he gave an interview about the Audible, there's the Audible Sandman, for the people listening, the Audible Sandman audio drama. And he sort of said the Audible audio drama is just sort of like preserving the comics as they are and not changing anything, sort of like just kind of translating them from a comic to audio drama. But for the TV show that they're currently working on and they've cast and everything, he is going to change stuff up to kind of be more contemporary. And he's part of that. They've actually talked about like adding trans women to the writer's room for the show, which I'm like, hell yes. So like, I love that. And this goes to show like why I love Neil Gaiman. Like he takes swings at these hard issues. He tries to show up for different, representations of minority groups, and he doesn't do it perfectly, but he always tries, and he tries to do it sympathetically and empathetically. And he admits where he gets wrong. And so it just like, to kind of make this point, and I know this might be a contingent, but to make this point very, very clear, like this is what gets me when people like say like, oh, writers like J.K. Rowling, like give them time and get, it's like, no, people like Neil Gaiman were getting it well before like you could have, like the mainstream got it, and he has shown growth over time. And so for other authors and things like that who like you just sort of use that as an excuse to sort of like say, oh, it was of their time, or like, oh, they give them some time to learn. It's like, no, you have the ability to. And Neil Gaiman's work shows how you can make imperfect work, but learn from it, move past it, and still use it to be talking about important things.
Absolutely. And it's such a little thing, but it means so much to just be aware of where your work was before. Like I've read a lot of comic books where like they were teetering on problematic at the time they were released. But authors come out later been like, hey, it was different. I was different. I would never dare write it this way now.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a little thing I just appreciate it. Because a lot of people, they get too defensive and they're like, no, listen to you. You're just too sensitive about it. Like, it's okay to admit that, like, you made a mistake before and that you would do it differently now.
Yeah. Art is never going to be perfect. That's why we have conversations about art.
Absolutely.
You know? So, like, of course, is like, as long as you're coming from a place of empathy and you acknowledge mistakes, then I think it's totally okay. Like, Neil Gaiman didn't perfectly represent trans people here. There's some harmful tropes in this writing, but there's also a lot of good, and he's acknowledged it and he's moved forward and he's still showing support for the trans community no matter what. And I think that's amazing. So
absolutely. Real quick, thank you so much for the super chat, Scotty G. I give you 2 out of 10 for great analysis. Thank you. I would also give us a 10. I think.
Yeah, I give you a 10 out of 9. I was gonna say 11 out of 10, but then I realized I did it wrong, and so now I'm like, I'll just lower the other grade. So you're above a 10 out of 10. That's basically what I'm saying.
Thank you.
For that you can lower my grade just for that.
20 out of 10. Come on. I have to one up,
Yeah.
I love this comment. Gaiman even got Harry Potter before J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
I need to read those, like the Books of Magic or whatever.
I haven't,
really good.
I haven't read them either, but I do want to.
Because I know there's like new comics for that and stuff. I'm so not in the know. I've seen the covers.
Because of just like financial situations, I've been wanting to read those, but I haven't had the chance to. But there's like a whole Sandman universe they're doing now, which is like the DC Comics way. Take this like one art house thing that they did years ago, and then just be like, let's make 1 billion comics based off of it.
Absolutely, so much of that lately.
Yeah.
So, if you're cool to still chill for a little bit, we can chill in the chat. Chat if you have any questions. We can I'll highlight some things. So Trish says this is Neil Gaiman's favorite story arc.
Mm-hmm.
Trish says not my favorite one, but I did like where some of the characters went.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. Even someone of any group is going to have trouble appealing to everyone else in said group. True. Myriad of perspectives. And he was in his 20s when he wrote this, wasn't he? So major props. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it goes back to what we were saying, like especially at the time, the representation was so limited that like you had to like kind of place like, this is the one trans rep that we get in comics. So like, we have to kind of put a lot of our thoughts into it so everyone has a perspective on it. But like no representation is going to be able to represent all of a group. So it's like kind of this like unfortunate space that we have to live in where it's like we have to hold representations accountable for where they do good and where they do harm, especially within broader context of like the lack of representation. But if this had existed with like a myriad of other trans representations, then it would have been way less of an issue. But again, it's like context versus just taking the text as is.
Oh, absolutely. So Jaden has a good question. For my story, what makes a good lesbian couple, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I mean, just write them truthfully, write them like anyone, like I think write them as anyone else does. I think the only thing to really keep in mind is, especially like as we were talking about this, like just kind of do the research to be aware of some of the tropes that exist and try your best to like skew away from them. Like don't do a bury your gay storyline if you can help it. I mean, I'm not going to say like if it's exactly what needs to be done for your story and it's like really going to like be the chrysalis of all your themes and ideas, I say okay, that if you can really justify it, it's not the worst thing in the world. But if at all possible, just try to not do these tropes, because it's just, number one, it's just sort of like makes your story less interesting by just falling into these tropes. And then number two, it's ultimately contributing to just a harmful trend within media. So I think the biggest thing is just write lesbians as people, write them like anything anyone else. Don't like treat them as like, oh, let's put this lesbian couple on a pedestal and show how crazy and weird them are. Just take them as is, as people existing, and do your research to not only show what it means to like be in these specific sort of like situations, like if they're living in like a very homophobic area, like maybe that, like be aware of like what that's going to do to your characters and how they would sort of handle that. And then also just try and eschew away from harmful tropes like bury your gays.
I think that's a really great advice. Start with the tropes first and like be aware of them. It's not what I've thought about starting at.
Mm-hmm.
My first thought is just don't make it a period piece because I cannot handle another lesbian period piece.
Oh my God, yes.
I can't do it. I can't. They're all period pieces. They're all like in the 1700s or 1800s.
Yeah, like a Portrait of a Lady on Fire, or like, oh my God, and then like oh God, what's the other one? Carol, and like it's always that. I worked at the Advocate, which is an LGBTQ magazine, and my two coworkers were so like every time that there was another like big lesbian movie, they got like so nerding out about whatever time period it was set in. So like when Carol came out, it was all like fur jackets and coats of like the 1920s. But then there was the one that was nominated for an Oscar that was like about the Queen or whatever. I forget that one.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
Yeah, I forget what it was about, but it was another sort of lesbian romance, and so then they got all into like castle stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, just pick like an aesthetic.
Oh yeah, and I'll still watch all of them.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no.
Like I watched Happiest Season. Was there tropes in that? Absolutely, but I watched it.
It's like I'll complain about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but I watched it twice. So what are you?
Yeah, that music slaps though. So.
Exactly. The favorite, Jessica Ashcraft. Thank you. Sorry.
Chill with the chat question. What are some good examples of modern day trans representation of comics? I need more on my never ending list.
Mm-hmm. One that I can think of right off the top of my head is I'm blanking on her name, but there is a trans woman in Saga. I'm blanking on her name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember her name either.
I love her. I forget her name, but she's like a warrior, and she she's a warrior character. She's sort of like emotionally like reserved, and I liked that she was sort of, because the tendency with a lot of like trans characters is to play them hyper femininely to like highlight that they are women. But that story like never shies away. Like, no, she is a woman. She's 100% a woman. There's never any doubt of that. But she's a badass warrior who like is emotionally reserved and everything. So I think that's good. And also I love that the story highlights how transness is not so alien that other people couldn't connect to it, because the main character of that story is a like biracial character from two different worlds, and the trans woman actually identifies with her through that, being like, I understand what it's like to have two different identities pulling on you and not sure of what your identity is within that. And I love that, because that's so often forgotten within trans representation, where it's like trans people are written as like, oh, your experience is so strange and ethereal and alien, I could never understand it, but we'll just try to understand. It's like, no, like the emotions we're feeling are not so crazy that you can't identify with it in another way. So I thought that was great.
I was asked earlier to make sure that I picked up Robin to show you.
Oh my gosh. Hi, cutie.
Hey, Robin, we can't sit like this right now though. I know you want to. I love you. I'm very cute.
My cat New has been coming in and out, but I cannot pick him up because he will bite me. He is very affectionate, but he will, if you try to touch him, he'll be like, when he doesn't want you to, you will know it.
Robin doesn't care about anything. So she's very cuddly. She doesn't care. Belly rubs, totally fine.
Oh yeah. See, my cat is like, you touch the belly, you will lose a finger.
And Jessica, I think any of my recommendations you've already read or seen. But I think I keep thinking about any first, second comic book, because there's so many, like Prince and the Dressmaker, Princess and the Dressmaker.
I haven't heard it.
Where you have like a woman or this girl who makes like dresses for this prince, who then goes out at nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually towards the end, he uses he pronouns, but he identifies more as like as gender fluid.
Oh,
and
okay.
It just very much welcomes that. It's very cute. It's by Jen Wong. So good.
Oh, I love that.
I think you'd like it. It's cute.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
And then I think about Snapdragon, where there's a character in that where you have the main character who's this girl who wants to be a witch. She's very like tomboyish, and her best friend, who later on will identify as a girl and like use she pronouns, but she likes to borrow like Snapdragons like mom stuff and clothes and like paint her nails.
Oh.
And so she uses like this spell she gets later just to go ahead and like finish the transformation for her. And everyone's like, yeah, it's cool.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
great. And there's an old lesbian couple in there who reunite later on. It's very cute.
Oh my gosh. I adore that so much. That is wonderful.
I actually need to send you stuff and be like, here, Jessie.
Do it. Tell me so. I would like give me all the recommendations. I want it.
Good. Jessica and I we will pair up.
If you want something like really a ton more like super political, but like very radical with and has trans representation, Bitch Planet is Bitch Planet has a lot, like a few trans representations, if I recall, and all like very diverse and very, very cool and very, very political, very like anti-capitalist, leftist sort of stuff, but very good. One of my favorites.
So Tara had a good question we didn't talk about, which is what did you think of the panels of Wanda at the end with death?
I thought that was super sweet because it kind of like if you read the other context in comics with Death, like Death is sort of like this friend character who just sort of doesn't often allow people, like she just says it's time to go, you just gotta go, and doesn't often allow people the chance to like say goodbye in these ways. And so I really liked that the trans women got a moment to basically, you can kind of infer that she convinced Death to let her say goodbye to Barbie and sort of have that conclusion. And so I like that there was sort of this like specialness to Wanda's death, even recognized by Death herself. I thought that was super sweet. And I thought that the moment was like, it was very sweet and kind of added to that, like, I'm gonna cry moment at the end.
Well, yeah, and that was the moment that got me. Because she was just really happy. And she got to look how she wanted to look. I was just like,
yeah.
I'm glad Death is doing great for you.
So nice. I wish I could get my Death glow up. What's up?
So question for you, more than I can answer. How would you rate A Game of You compared to the other Sandman story arcs?
I would put it like kind of ominously like right in the middle. It's kind of like, and this isn't meant to be a knock. I would say it's like the average Sandman story, because I think there are ones that are like hit greater heights than this one that I think are like have some really crazy ideas and really pull it together in some really intriguing ways, especially as the series goes on, because this is about in the middle of the run. So I think as the series goes on, it gets even better. But there's some stuff that I also think is a lot worse than this one, and a lot more like as well. Like some of his stuff set in Africa is like kind of like like it's not it's like not the worst, but also I'm not the best judge of that, and it's kind of like okay. So there's some stuff that's worse, and there's stuff that's a lot better. So in terms of like rating compared, I think this is like the like bar, like this is the average bar. Like I don't think it gets. This is sort of like the middle ground of the entire series, I guess is the best way to put it.
So this is in response to me saying no more period lesbian movies. What if it's future lesbians? Absolutely.
I will take future lesbians. Oh my gosh.
Put them in space. Done. Absolutely. And Jessica said Dickinson disrespect Maddie for shame. I don't have Apple, whatever. I can't watch that show, Jessica. I don't know if it's good.
I have not seen it. I do have Apple TV, but literally I only have it for All Mankind. So that's about it.
I know that there's some like fantasy show on there that I want to watch, but I don't remember what it is.
I just want to see. I haven't watched it yet. That's the Jason Momoa show. Where, like everyone's blind.
That's what it is. Yeah, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, I just want to see it because like it seems so weird and silly, but I'm also just here for Jason Momoa broing out.
Yeah, same. I just like seeing them happy.
I could just watch a show. I'll just literally watch a thing, just Jason Momoa calling me bro for hours. Even that's like mildly misgendering. I'm in for it.
Toporn said, I want consequence-free period lesbian romances. Yeah, that would be better. Or like fantasy ones. No more period ones. Just do fantasy and have them be orcs.
Oh, well, we need. I haven't read the book Orc, but we need more orc fantasy just in general.
Yes, please. I mean, people who watch the show know that I love thick ladies. So,
do it. Don't be ashamed. That's
ladies
amazing. Yes.
would be great. I like my omnibuses. Like I like my ladies. Thick and I don't know. You could kill somebody with them, I guess.
Thick and containing many issues.
Yes. I wish if we were in my basement, I've got like 2 sideshow figures that I'm very proud of. And they're both very thick. So like it's Wonder Woman and she's got the thickest thighs. And then you've got Red Sonja and she's like, normally I make her really skinny.
Mhm.
And this one's like, no, like she looks rough. And she's got really thick legs. I was like,
Oh my gosh.
wow.
See, my like hottest women ever are women who can beat the crap out of me but look badass doing it. So like my number one would be like why am I blanking on her name? Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh.
Furiosa?
Furiosa, yeah. Furiosa, hottest thing in the world. Like I just look at her and I'm like, all right, just kill me and I will be very happy.
Tina, thick but not thick enough for Maddie not to drop.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you're a big Trekkie. I'm
Star
also a big
Trek?
Star Trek fan.
Never heard of it.
I have not watched all of this series. I've only watched original series, TNG, and Deep Space Nine. And Deep Space Nine is my favorite, which is not common for most people that I know. But I'm curious about who your favorite characters are.
In
I know it's probably a big question, but I would like to know.
Oh yeah, no, it's I think it's actually pretty easy to be fairly honest. Like my 2 favorite of all time are Jessie Dax and 7 of 9, like bar none. I love Jessie. I also have an appreciation for Ezri recently. I did a rewatch of Deep Space Nine. I'm like, Ezri's pretty cool. Like Jessie, I always put it this way: like Jessie is the girl that I want to be. Like she's kick ass. Like takes no names from. Like takes no crap from anybody. She's like a science nerd, yet she'll also kick your butt with a batleth. She'll take on Worf, which is amazing, but also super smart. So she's everything that and also she's like distinctly feminine too. Like she'll also wear like the hottest dress at any point. So like I adore that. So Jessie is who I want to be. Ezri is who I actually am. Like this dorky, like, well, okay, I'm just gonna show up and everyone's so cool and you're wonderful and oh my gosh, this is great, everybody. Oh, isn't this what like just being like so on place? Yeah, exactly. So that's how I frame them. And then 7 of 9, I get like I just really loved so much about her character, about like her rediscovering her humanity, her coming to like learn more about herself, her like her relationship with Janeway and sort of this like this very something that we especially at the time didn't get to see a lot, which was like 2 women bonding in a platonic way that was like they mutually sort of gave like there was clearly like a matriarchal sort of thing going on with her and Janeway, but they also sort of like taught each other things in a very healthy and interesting way and sort of like pushed and pulled on each other. Sometimes when it got toxic, they would like address that. Like, I don't know, it was just such a complicated relationship that you so rarely got to see. And I identify with 7 so much, and also just through like, you know, I'm also on the autism spectrum. And so I also just identified heavily with like her for that as well. And also just badass Borg ladies are cool. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm happy here. I'm a huge Jax fan. All right, Dax.
Jax fan? Yeah.
Yeah. Words.
Is that a ship name with herself? Jax?
Sure, it works.
Yeah, Jessie is the best.
And I love Worf so much. And I love that ship, and I didn't think I would because I love Deanna Troi. But then I saw this ship and I was like, I'm in.
See, I'm one of the people that doesn't like Worf, but I love her and Worf together. But I'm also just like, Worf, get over your toxic masculinity bullshit.
Yeah. It's true. It's not great.
Yeah.
Lee said, wreck me, Riker, all the way.
Oh my gosh, Riker I just literally this week finished my rewatch of Next Generation. I'm like, I adore Riker. I always thought it was like kind of boring when I first watched as a kid. Now I'm just like, no, Riker is the best and like the most sex positive dude of all time. Like literally, if you go back and rewatch that show, every time some other character mentions like I started dating somebody or I had like a sexy night or whatever, the camera always cuts to Riker who goes like, yeah, I bet you did. And it's just like so supportive, and it just like cuts back and he's just like, okay, Riker, that was wonderful.
I love that. Okay, so I have time for one more question, then we'll wrap up so I don't keep you forever, although I'd like to.
Like I said, I got no life, so.
All right, so with the last question from Hannah. I've never had a transgender character that reflected me as a person. I'm okay with that, but I do wonder, what is it like to see yourself in a character that way?
I don't like. I don't even disagree with you because I actually don't think I've like fully seen a character that represents all of me in any way. I think probably one of the closest actually comes from Star Trek recently on Discovery. There's the character of Adira, who is very much kind of me in a lot of ways, but there's even some distance with me there because of their age. Adira is like much younger than I am now. So maybe if I was the same age at the time that I watched the show, that I would have identified more, but there's still a little bit of a distance. So, it's interesting because like I look at like Wanda, and Wanda doesn't represent me either. I'm not as like bold facing and outspoken as she is in terms of like for my own advocacy. I'll do that for like other people. I'll beat the crap out of anybody who speaks ill about other people, but for myself, I'm like, that's fine. So I think like it's all about like sort of like finding these bits and pieces in different ways and sort of like finding the gems of like ourselves within these characters. And I actually like I feel like a lot of people probably feel that. I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think like we ever find characters that fully encompass us because we are always changing throughout our lives. And so a character that may not resonate with us at one point may resonate with us years down the line, or vice versa, or things like that. And so, I don't want to speak to your experience, Hannah, because clearly like you've had your own experiences identifying with characters, but I also think like we identify in different ways with different characters. And I think especially one other thing too with this, sorry, I'm going a bit of a...
No, I love it. Go for it.
I think it's also interesting with minority groups because any minority group that isn't like, and this isn't hating on you, but like anyone who isn't a cis heterosexual white male does not always get to see, it doesn't get to have a wide variety of our representations. And so we as minority groups are often used to finding ourselves in other types of characters, being forced to identify with other characters because stories often ask us to identify with like characters that don't reflect our identity. And so we're used to sort of finding pieces of reflections of ourselves in other ways, which I think is just kind of interesting and speaks to why I think a lot of minority groups have such strong empathy, because we are asked to empathize with other people all the time. And I think that is kind of a strength, but it is also a sadness too, that I think I agree with you, Hannah, that it's like, don't think I've ever kind of sitting here thinking about it. I don't think I ever myself have fully seen myself in a character. And I know that if that ever does happen one day, I probably will bawl. I mean, I bawled a bunch at just seeing representation done well. Like I did with Star Trek Discovery, I did with that character. But I don't know, just sort of reflecting on it, it's like, I don't think there has ever been. And I think that speaks to a failing of just representation in general today. But I also think it not to say that this was always a good thing, but it also speaks to why any minority community is just strong, because we are able to have that empathy because of that.
That's such a great answer.
I try.
No, and I agree, because I feel like growing up, it's always just been picking pieces from different characters that I feel like I feel strongly about. And for me, it's always been relating more strongly to a story. I'm like, okay, this story is a situation that I can relate to, or finding characters. It's more so characters that are like comfort characters. That's a term people use now on the internet. Or like characters that have things in me that I want to do more with, or I want to be more so with. Yeah. So like growing up, like attaching myself more so to characters that were, now I know as an adult, were gay.
Yeah.
Like Sailor Jupiter, who's bisexual and tall. And I was like, that's me. I'm tall. That's me.
I get it. Yeah.
Like Utena, and like, oh, she's a prince.
Utena. Oh no. Oh my God. Fucking.
See, Jessie, we gotta be best friends.
Utena is the best thing.
I know. I just ordered the box of the manga because it was like 50% off. I was like, yes.
Oh my God. If it wasn't, I wish it was within reach. I literally have the box set of all the DVDs in the movie, and I adore it. It's in my other room, but I love that. I love the show, and I need to read the manga. I haven't read the manga, to be very honest with you, but
I haven't either, so that's why I was gonna pick it up.
Oh my God. You'll have to tell me how it is.
Because I watched all the anime, watched the movie a million times. I just wanted to be her. I was like, that's it. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
And now as an adult, I'm like, I see why.
It's like, maybe there was something here. Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah.
So weird how that works out. I love Hannah's response after that too. I think most transgender characters I read are teenagers transitioning, and I can't relate with that. I think it's heavily skewed in terms of age of characters.
Yeah, I think that's also interesting too, because there seems to be certain, especially with trans characters, there's like, oh, focusing on the transitioning part because that's the coolest or most interesting part, quote unquote. Like it's the most like, oh, the transition time period is when everything's happening, and it's like now, not that I've completed transitioning, I still want to get like FFS, for example, facial feminization surgery, but like I've been like kind of living as my gender identity and living out in my gender identity for years now, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'm just kind of here, and like I'm not transitioning as an everyday thing anymore, so it's kind of harder to identify with transitioning characters nowadays. Like I can remember that, but I don't necessarily identify it with me in the moment. I actually sometimes will feel like I'll identify more with like the non-trans characters in a story, like a more like just woman, like non-trans woman, so a cis woman. Why am I not finding words that I know? Cis woman character, I'll probably find myself identify with a cis woman character more than a trans woman character in those aspects. So
yeah, and I like to see more plot of like the people who's not transitioning, which I agree. I think you're right. Like a lot of talking about tropes. I think people tend to lean heavily, which I think I'm glad that we do have that content. But so often, right, it becomes like it's always about the coming out story or the transition story, and not so much about just the living.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, that's where we get some complaints too, where it's like, oh, why they just shove it in our faces, which is dumb. I hate that comment, but I think a lot of that can be tied into like this is the same story every time, and why can't it just be people living their lives? Which I agree with. I like having both. I'm not going to discount both because they both mean a lot to me. But sometimes I just want a story.
Yeah,
people to live and be themselves, and also be around other gay people, because gay people hang out with gay people.
Oh, yes, we do.
People hang out with other LGBT people. There's like a token one in a group.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, we're not always just like the one gay person in the straight group. I think that's like, it's so true. And again, it goes back to the idea of like, it's not a problem necessarily in itself. It's just a problem in the context of like, this is all that we get. And it also speaks to like who got to tell the stories and who gets to pick which stories get published. Right. So like even going back to Gaiman's story with the Sandman here, to sort of like wrap out on that idea, like he's telling a story where the trans character is so defined by her transness. Like that is the main crux for character, her trauma in the story. Like when we see her backstory in the dream state, like it's about her being trans, which is cool. But like there are other things that go on with trans people. We don't just like think like, oh, let's talk about like trans stuff today. I think
Wanda's really scared of spiders.
Yeah.
Or drowning.
Exactly.
Where's that representation?
Exactly. So like, but I think it's just because when you have writers that are like, even well-meaning writers like Neil Gaiman or like other writers, they will hone in on the fact that's most fascinating to them because it's more interesting, quote unquote, to see a trans woman transitioning. That's what makes her different, quote unquote. So they'll hone in on that part of it because that's what's most different from their experience. Because then they want the challenge of writing something that's different from their experience, because that's what writers do. Which I get, but it's like, oh, if you got a trans woman to write a story, or a trans man or a non-binary person to write these stories, they would show different aspects of these types of characters that we don't get to see as much, because they will hone in on different aspects that other writers won't really know because they're not what's talked about. And it sort of like compounds itself because you start to be like, oh, I get the transition story. I've seen that in other media, so I'll write my own transition story. So it just starts to create a ball of a cycle, I guess is the words that I used in that sentence.
That's great. Man, I can't remember the last time I had an already reader where I talked for this long. This has been really fun and just nice and casual. I always get nervous before a show, especially someone new. And so I was like, I hope it goes well. And immediately we hit it off immediately. I was like, oh, good.
Yeah, we were talking Mass Effect before we went live, and I was like, oh, I automatically adore this person. So thank you so much for having me. It was really, really wonderful.
Everyone, please go check out Jessie's YouTube channel and go subscribe because they're amazing. All of her info is down here in the description. In there.
It's over there or up there. What's on?
I promise you not be disappointed. If there's anything like topical going on, All I have to do is like, oh, Jessie already made a video. I'll go watch this.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't always do that, but that's my own anxiety. It's like, I got to talk about it. I need to.
No, I love it. And now to my end of show spiel. Thank you, everybody, for coming in and hanging out with us. This always makes my night. If you are checking this out later and you've read this book, let us know in the comments down below. Or if you have any thoughts or opinions, let us know in the comments down below. I hope that they are nice, because if not, I'll either delete them or I will respond with a quirky response. Like if you say, wow, Maddie and her agendas, I will answer, I have ADHD. I do lose a lot of agendas. I can't ever fill them out. So just expect those kind of responses, just as a warning. I'll be back next week with my friend Danny talking about X-Men Disassembled, which hopefully I will like. We will see. And, subscribe, all that stuff. We have a Patreon through which you can vote for this month's book of the month for Old Reader, New Reader. I think it's Star Wars, so I think Kaden, the Last Padawan, is winning. You'll see. And yeah, thank you all so much, and I will catch you all next week. And thank you, Jessie.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone in the chat. You are all wonderful.